Hello, friends. Welcome to my channel. Today's story is titled The Lighthouse That Waits, and this is another scary story from Scotland. So let's begin. The sea wind blows cold and relentlessly across the desolate rock that supports Island Moor Lighthouse. It's a lonely vigil that the old stone tower has kept for decades now. Since 1971, it hasn't functioned as a navigational aid. No ship is foolish enough to navigate these shores without modern assistance. But it still stands, battered by the North Atlantic and haunted by the ghosts of its past. For in December 1900, the 3 lighthouse keepers stationed here vanished without a trace. Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald McCafferty were last seen on December when a supply boat arrived with provisions for the winter. The next day, the vessel was scheduled to depart, but it never did. On December, the relief team arrived only to find the door of the lighthouse locked from the inside with no sign of the keepers. All 3 had apparently leapt to their deaths into the churning waves below rather than face the grim fate that awaited them within the tower. That was the conclusion of the Northern Lighthouse Board anyway, despite the fact that no bodies had been recovered and no explanation could be offered for what would have compelled 3 sane men to take their own lives. But that was just the beginning of the tale. For within the lighthouse, a 4th man found his own end, or perhaps his own beginning. I am the new keeper of the Flannan Isles light, or so I introduced myself to the old woman who had rowed me out from the mainland. My predecessor had resigned after just 6 months in the post, citing nervous exhaustion and a general distaste for the solitude. I saw it as an opportunity to get away from it all, to commune with nature in its rawest and most elemental form, and, sure, maybe to make a little bit of money on the side. You see, the Nelson's Lighthouse Board, which oversaw the upkeep of all the old lighthouses along Scotland's rugged coast, paid its keepers a small stipend for any interesting specimens they might find in the area. Anything from unusual bird eggs to bits of interesting seaweed. And there was always the chance of finding something truly valuable, like the rare blue lobster, worth hundreds of pounds alive or even more dead. My predecessors had left the lantern room empty, so I was to be the first person to occupy it in almost 50 years. I checked the oil levels and the condition of the Fresnel lens and ran through various scenarios in my head. If the storm came in hard from the south, I'd need to replace the wick on the starboard side. If it veered to the west, then the port side would be the first to go. And if it was an east wind, well, then I'd be safe until the storm abated. As dusk fell and the Atlantic grew dark, I set about readying the lantern for the coming night. And that was when I heard the footsteps. At first it was nothing more than the lapping of the waves against the stone tower. Then, clearer now, the distinct sound of a heavy boot on the iron stairs leading up to the lantern room. I froze, listening intently. There was the scrape of metal on stone, then silence. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me. Surely there was no one else on the island. Then I heard it again. The same sound, closer now. And as I watched in disbelief, I saw the shadow of a man pass between the bars of the lantern room window. It was tall and gaunt, like an emaciated crow, and it moved with a strange shuffling gait. I blinked, and the shadow was gone. Rubbish, I thought, just a trick of the light. As darkness fell and I lit the great paraffin lamp, I turned my thoughts to supper. I heated up some soup on the Primus stove, then settled down to watch the waves crash against the shore. Outside, the wind screamed around the tower like a banshee, and the rain lashed against the windows. I ate slowly, half listening to the storm and half watching the door. Was it my imagination, or did it seem to bulge slightly with each gust of wind? Again, I told myself it was nothing more than my own fear getting the better of me. By the time I'd finished my meal, the storm had passed and the sea had fallen to a gentle lull. I climbed the stairs to the lantern room to check on the oil lamps and found the door wedged open, revealing the staircase beyond. This was odd. I remembered closing the door before I'd lit the lamps, and I couldn't imagine why anyone would want to leave it open. It was then that I noticed the floorboards creaking above me. Someone or something was moving around in the tower's cupola, just above the lantern room. I called out, but no reply came. What was up there? Why had my predecessor quit his post? And why had those poor souls who'd met their demise here almost a century ago not simply fled to the safety of the mainland? With a deep breath, I began to climb the stairs towards the source of the noise. It wasn't difficult to find the footsteps again. They were clear and distinct, echoing through the narrow confines of the tower. As I ascended, I felt a growing sense of unease. What if it was some sort of wild animal? There were seals and other creatures that sometimes made their way onto the island, but surely none could explain the sound I'd heard. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, my heart was pounding in my chest. And then I saw it, the journal lying open on the floorboards directly in front of me. I bent down and opened it, revealing the faded ink of the last entry. It was dated December, the very day the previous keepers had vanished, and it contained the frantic scrawl of a man on the edge of insanity. Over the course of the next few days, I read through the journal. Here was the story of a man driven mad by isolation and haunted by the voices of his predecessors, reliving the same fears and doubts that had driven those before him to the brink. I learned of his descent into madness as he documented the sounds he heard in the dead of night, the scratching in the walls, the whispers on the stairs, and the footsteps that never seemed to belong to anything solid. But then the last page, the final entry, was blank, as if the writer had simply stopped writing after reaching this point. And as I read it, I became aware of the floorboards groaning above me once more. I looked up to see the shadow of a man shuffling back and forth, and I realized with dawning horror that the journal was old, very old. The footsteps I'd heard weren't those of the previous keeper. They were mine. The wind rose outside, shaking the old lighthouse to its foundations, and the floorboards began to creak ominously. I stood frozen, staring up at the shadowy figure above me, my own reflection staring back at me from the wainscot ceiling. And then the footsteps stopped. I didn't sleep that night, of course. I sat huddled in the corner listening to the wind scream around the tower, waiting for the inevitable moment when the door would burst open and the shadow come for me. But dawn broke, and with it, the sun, chasing away the darkness and revealing the journal in my hands. It was then that I noticed the ink on the final page hadn't been dry. Taking a deep breath, I dipped my pen in the ink bottle and wrote, "December. My name is your name, and I am the new keeper of the Flannan Isles light. I write this entry knowing full well that whoever finds this journal will never see me again. I can feel it in my bones that this place will not let me go. The scratching in the walls is my voice, and the footsteps on the stairs are my own. Today is my last full day here, and tomorrow the relief boat will come. If they ever do, tell them I gave my life to the light. Tell them that I understood, that I tried to warn them, but they would not listen. This is the last thing I will ever write. I hear the footsteps now. They're coming for me. Oh God, help me." And that's where I ended my final entry, because I knew that if I didn't finish it right now, it would be finished for me. The footsteps were coming closer, and the door was rattling in its frame. I could feel the presence behind it, whatever it was, and it was hungry. So that's the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and share it with your friends, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Thanks for watching. Bye.